But the idea that Solaire was sort of turned into soup by being like his essence, his blood, his fluids, gross, is put into this Estus soup. Why, hello there. Welcome to The Hunt, episode 2. The Hunt is a series where I am taking a look at various, characters, locations, lore theories across the Souls games, and looking at them in a different context, looking at competing lore theories, and generally hunting for lore that is unique and may not be in the popular canon, and just taking a look at it because there's a lot of great stuff out there. And today I am going to be taking a look at probably the most popular character in the series, Solaire. Hunting down some lore because I was talking about him and I was like, what? But there's these crazy theories about Solaire as soup. Solaire is a sandworm. Like, what is happening there? So I wanted to do a little lore hunt for Solaire, and you might think we know Solaire's story, of course. But I found some interesting and cool stuff, and I think it's definitely worth taking a look at and maybe challenging your conception. And maybe it has been a while since you've thought about Solaire's story, and it's worth checking out. So let's dive in. I'm gonna introduce you to some cool content created by the community. There will be links in the description for everything, and you can check it out. And I will give a brief overview, and if anything strikes your interest, then go follow up and check it out, and let them know where you found it. And of course, I want to thank the patrons who make this show possible. It is by supporting me on patreon.com/thelorehunter that The Hunt is a series and it's a thing. And if you're interested in getting these episodes early, getting credit on my videos, and generally helping support what I'm doing, you can head to patreon.com/thelorehunter and check that out. But let's get into Solaire. You probably know the basic story of Solaire, and if you don't, I'll give you a refresher. So, Solaire from Astora, and he became undead intentionally to come to Lordran in search of his son. And in doing so, over the course of Dark Souls 1, we discover that Solaire had nothing special about him, that he just trained really hard, and that he got where he is just through being powerful, and he is a useful summon. He's part of the Sunlight Covenant, and he decorated his own armor using the symbol of Gwyn's firstborn, and over the course of the story, he helps us, we help him, and the sort of canonical version is that in Izalith, he gets a sunlight maggot on his head. It possesses him. He does not go undead, seemingly. He's just possessed by the sunlight maggot and goes crazy, attacks us, or not. He just wanders around down there, and either way, that's the end of his story. Conversely, if you are able to get the 30 humanity to the White Lady, to Quelaag's sister, and get the entrance open, and you don't progress into Izalith, and then you kill the sunlight maggot, you can summon Solaire at the end in the fight against Gwyn. And Miyazaki says in a podcast that he was on that if you summon Solaire and he helps you defeat Gwyn, that he believes that when Solaire returns to his world, he goes and he links the flame himself. So those are sort of the two endings. Solaire doesn't explicitly show up, and we will get into some of the wacky theories about Solaire from Dark Souls 3. But that's the basic overview of Solaire, and I just wanted to present a few interesting things I found when I was lore hunting, and really having a great time diving into some of these videos and just seeing what people sort of made after that initial boom, especially post Dark Souls 3, in which the popular theory that Solaire was Gwyn's firstborn, was basically debunked by the presence of the nameless king, who is much more explicitly Gwyn's firstborn. The first video I wanted to point out is a video by Mont from 2018, where he goes over Solaire's story. He also brought up the fact that in Dark Souls 2, the Sunlight Medal item description says, "The brave fighters who bore these medals are gone, but the sun never sets. On this day begins the contest to find the sun's truest son." And Silvermont brings up the concept of, could Gwyn or someone else sort of be using the heirs of the sun to find a replacement god of war? Big train. Could they be using finding a replacement god of war? And I thought that was an interesting idea, that maybe part of like getting sunlight medals and everything, and maybe the ultimate sort of prize or goal was to find someone worthy of sort of being a god of war to replace Gwyn's firstborn, who was erased from the annals for siding with the dragons, ultimately, is what we find out for the Nameless King, his name forgotten. That I think is an interesting theory that I heard before. And Silvermont's take as far as what the sun is that Solaire is looking for is he goes back to the podcast that I mentioned, where, the sun may just be linking the first flame in Solaire's world as sort of finding his own sun, and sort of the happy ending. Of course, he might, put the sunlight maggot on his head, and that's sort of the crazy version. And I also wanted to point out that Silvermont also did a video where he addresses the idea in Dark Souls 3. There was sort of a joke theory that sort of got adopted as a meme by the community that Solaire became the Karthus Sandworm. Silvermont does, sort of just entertain that thought for a moment and looks at a few of the items you get from the Sandworm and sort of goes through the efforts of describing why this sort of outlandish theory probably isn't true, besides sort of the obvious of it just being kind of silly. And the next video I wanted to talk about is an interesting take by the Ashen Hollow, who was on the Elden Wait talking with me. And the Ashen Hollow in this video, I believe it is from 2016, he presents a different take of Solaire, where I think a lot of the opinions of Solaire is that he's very altruistic. He really wants to be helpful, and that there's sort of nothing sort of selfish about his goal. I don't mean selfish necessarily as like morally wrong, just that he's not really doing it for himself. Like he sort of has altruistic goals to help people. But the Ashen Hollow sort of takes a stance that Solaire is striving for power. And, he views so Solaire is the only warrior of sunlight to, as we find out in his item description, like have the symbol of the sun and everything on his armor and his shield and everything. And that he was really taking that rendition that he put on personally for himself, but that's not what warriors of sunlight look like. He was the only one who decked himself out. And Ashen Hollow brings up the fact that he's striving for his own sun, and he says stuff like, "If only I could be so grossly incandescent." And he has a line where he says, I think when you defeat him, when he has a sunlight maggot, where he says, "I am the sun." So the Ashen Hollow in his video pursues the angle that he was trying to achieve power, and even if that ends up being like he wanted to link the flame, like he wanted to be special, and that's why he trained so hard, and that's why his armor wasn't anything special, but he was powerful because he was striving for power. And then, so it's sort of that tragic thing of him failing to do so without help of the chosen undead, sort of like Sigmar. How Sigmar couldn't really complete his journey either, but it's the chosen undead who hurts him. But in this case, Solaire is always sort of destined to fail in getting his own son by coming to Lordran, unless the player character sort of intercedes and keeps the sunlight maggots from him. And so that sort of takes a different twist, where it's sort of almost like a Big Hat Logan thing where this like pursuit of power or knowledge is corrupting and leads to madness, essentially, in this case being possessed by the sunlight maggot. And my last video that I'm going to bring up here is a video by Radic, and you can find it in the description below, as everything else. And the interesting thing I wanted to bring up here is that in the video, Radic mentions that Dark Souls 3, the Sacred Oath miracle, says, "This is the tale of the sun's firstborn, his faithful first knight, and the brave dragon slayer who served them both." In this video, Radic argues that Solaire is the faithful first knight, and that in this case, his son is Gwyn's firstborn, and that he is traveling. He became undead, and he's traveling to Lordran because he's looking for the firstborn, who is, like the patron saint, the god of the warriors of sunlight. That's where he is the sun, and that's his symbol. And so that Solaire is looking. He's the faithful first knight, looking for Gwyn's firstborn. And perhaps because he was expunged from the annals and his name was forgotten, and things are timey-wimey on Solaire as someone who is hollowing, things get confused and he may have forgotten, history may have forgotten, and he's traveling to Lordran in pursuit of someone who we find out in Dark Souls 3 is long gone from Lordran. So I thought that was another interesting take. You can find out more details in that video, and also it sort of talks about Solaire's relationship with the Nameless King, so it's a good video worth checking out. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is this really cool article I found. I found it on Tumblr. There's also a Medium version. I will link it in the description below. And it talks about Solaire as this metatextual influence, like his symbolic import into the community at large, not only as like a meme, but sort of where he stands in the game, and sort of explores in this really in-depth way why Solaire became so important to the community, and why that, could have led to some of these wacky Dark Souls 3 headcanons. One is, that Solaire is soup, and the reason in that he's the Karthus sandworm, as I mentioned earlier. And for the soup one, just to cover my bases, is if you forgot, there's where you find sunlight metals near where there's Estus soup, and in the undead settlement you find like disembodied corpses, and that's where you find a patch of the sunlight metal. And it's obviously a stretch and it's kind of a joke, but the idea that Solaire was sort of turned into soup by being like his essence, his blood, his fluids, gross, is put into this Estus soup. And and in the article, Stenbeck, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, talks about how there's an interpretation of that as like almost like a Eucharist, like a Christian interpretation, which is kind of interesting to explore. And the other one is that as a sandworm, it's sort of a joke, and it came from the idea of the sandworm having this miracle attached to him, and these in the undead ash. And while Silvermont, who sort of debunks this idea, in this article, Stenbeck looks at why it may have gained popularity and why it was compelling. And there's this idea of, you have Solaire as this friendly figure who is this first person to be friendly to you, and how in some ways the Solaire represents like the best of the player, and sort of this idealized version of the player's goals of pursuing their son, and doing so with a smile and doing it so positively. And the sandworm represents, in some ways, this like purification, this like, instead of just having this end where he's consumed by this maggot and that's just the end, that he somehow comes out in this like transformative way. And sure, it's like sort of twisted, but they go into in the article just different interpretations of that and how it could relate back to these different sort of cultural ideas. But really interesting stuff, and that was sort of the surprise little treat for me as I was looking into this. Was not expecting something so academic and in depth, and it's really worth checking out, so I would give it a look. But so there you have it. I did a little bit of lore hunting, just taking a look at what, you know, the story of Solaire and different interpretations, and hopefully I gave a nice little interview or, you know, overview, competing ideas, and you can follow up with all those are in the description. I will link what I can during the video, and yeah, so I had a lot of fun diving into Solaire's story in 2021, and once again, this was not possible without the support of my patrons on Patreon, so I very much appreciate that, and patrons get these episodes early, so if you're interested in that, check it out, and I will see you for the next hunt.